Um, How many of you have read the Universal Declaration of Human Rights? Wow, good. It is, of course, the foundation of the United Nations, and it speaks to the freedom of to cross borders, the right to education, employment, health care, and it gave rise to the 1951 Compact on Refugees. The United States signed on to that compact in 1968, but it did not become U.S. law until 1980. And in effect, the Refugee Act of 1980 is a legacy of the Vietnamese resettlement. Since 1975, the United States has resettled almost 3 million refugees. Illinois has resettled about 130,000, more than 100,000 in the city of Chicago. Internationally, there are 15 million refugees of concern to the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. They have offices in 30 different countries.
Oh, over 100, about 130.
130?
Sorry.
As Carrie pointed out, 80% of the world's refugees are women and children. And so that creates special problems, particularly in the resettlement. Resettlement to Illinois has gone in waves, actually nationwide. So that between 75 and 83, mainly from Southeast Asia, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia. Between 83 and 88, as a result of the Refugee Act, which universalized the definition and consequently the demography of the people that we were prepared to accept and resettle. Between 83 and 88, main groups came from Poland, Romania, and Ethiopia. Between 88 and 94, mainly from the former Soviet Union. Between 94 and 2000, Illinois resettled the largest number of Bosnian refugees in the country. Beginning in 2000, we hit a period of extreme diversity. And insofar as our service delivery system is highly dependent on language, as Aklam pointed out, language is the most important tool that a refugee can acquire. In the last 6 years, we've resettled over 11,000 refugees in Chicago, 60 different nations. So bear in mind that in the period from 2000 until the present day, we've seen diminished resources, and yet an increased need for bilingual staff. We've received many disabled refugees. We've received refugees with extreme mental health issues. In Illinois, we have been dedicated to treating whole human beings. We've tried to create and mainly have created a holistic service delivery model. And Greg will talk a bit more about that. In addition, we've been leaders in immigrant integration. This is, after all, the city of Jane Addams and Sal Alinsky. And it was very clear from the very beginning that once refugees were no longer being served as refugees with federal funding, that they would need an instrument to preserve the community and to care for the community and to express the human rights of the community. And so we've invested a great deal of resource and energy in the development of what we call mutual assistance associations. And I suspect that the Iraqis will have such an organization in the not distant future. The Iraqis, of course, are a special case. After Desert Storm, Illinois received 10% of the national total of Iraqi refugees. And they are mainly very well resettled. Many are suburban homeowners. And I know that this new wave of Iraqis will also do well. One of the questions that was posed to us is, how do refugees get here, and how are they selected? Let me begin by saying that there are many players in this process. And the State Department, Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration, consults with area desks within the State Department, consults with the 9 national resettlement agencies. Those agencies, by the way, are affiliated in something called the Refugee Council USA. So if you're interested, www.rcusa.org. The nationals have about 400 local affiliates, like Greg's. And they submit to the State Department a proposal for how many refugees they have the capacity to resettle in the ensuing year. Excuse me. The State Department then sends the profiles of each state from all of the VOLAGs, or collates the state plan and sends it to the state for comment. After that, the president signs a presidential determination which identifies a target for areas of the world. And then the process of reception and placement begins.
Thanks, Ed. It's my job to talk a bit about reception and placement and what we do to receive refugees and help them to become contributing members of the community as quickly as possible. Bear in mind, there are a number of things we're not talking about here at all. We're talking about resettlement, strictly resettlement. Of course, the best solution for any refugee circumstance is for the refugee to go home again. And I mean, any of us want to go home, and I've had the privilege of working and serving refugees since 1980, 79, and I don't think I've ever met one who did not want to go back to her homeland. That's the best, but of course with dignity and safety. We're not talking about voluntary repatriation. We're not talking about local integration either of refugees who have provided asylum using the Iraqi case if Jordan or Syria could provide local settlement to the refugees there. And in the case of Iraqis, Syria and Jordan cannot do so. We're not talking about local integration either. That would be another solution to a refugee's displaced circumstances. We're talking strictly about resettlement. Ed cited the figure of 15 million refugees around the world. Earlier we heard about 2.5 million of those are Iraqis, and that's our case study today. Of the 15 million refugees in the world today, again, mind you, each and every one a human being like you and I, and 4 out of 5 women and children, add to that the elderly. Of those 15 million, I bet among you, you would not, I mean, 1 or 2 of you might be able to guess how many end up in resettlement circumstances, how many are resettled anywhere in the world. Mind you, it's not just USA that resettles, but it's also Canada, Australia, the UK, Netherlands, and such. In a given year, not even 1/2 of 1% of those 15 million are resettled anywhere in the world. In our nation, you just heard some of the numbers from Ed. We've, as a nation, been very generous and resettled about 3 million over the last several decades. Illinois has been a leader in all of that. But yet, for the nation as a whole this last year, I did not see the figures as of 30 September.
74,000.
74,000. So, you know, Soldier Field can handle almost that many. And we as a nation, over 12 months, from Alaska down to Florida and Maine to Arizona, resettled 74,000. I've already wasted 2 minutes, but I felt it was necessary to set that stage too, because now my role begins in talking about how we receive refugees when we welcome them at O'Hare. And it's not just theory that I'm going to talk about here, but it's actual practice. And that, one more sentence before that. How is it that somebody like Ahlam was selected to be resettled in USA? That's a key element too. The United Nations and many of the actors that Ed was talking about identifies people based upon their human rights. The Declaration of Human Rights has already been referred to. There are plenty of human rights in that document that will impact who it is that's determined for refugee resettlement. That's to ensure that that individual's human rights are respected. And therefore, in the jargon of the trade, resettlement is a tool of protection to protect the individual. So that would mean an unaccompanied minor, or a single mother, or a person with special medical needs, or a special person who has been too close to the former regime, or maybe too close to a certain entity that has led to the destabilization. So to protect their lives, they're whisked out as quickly as can be. So again, resettlement boils down to protection of human rights, and one key element of human rights is, of course, to be together with family and family reunification. So that would be yet another driving factor for determining who would be eligible for resettlement in the United States. And how is it that they end up in Chicago? Well, it might be that they have a tie to this community. They may have family members who live nearby, or friends who live nearby for that family reunification, or because we at our office may have special programs that address the needs. For example, we do have a special program that helps medically disabled and medically challenged people. Chicago, as Ed was saying, has certain MAAs, mutual aid associations, so there are institutions in place that make this community more welcoming. So it would be based upon some of those reasons why somebody would come here as opposed to, say, Oregon. One other key driving factor is, of course, where will the person get their feet on the ground as quickly as can be? Where will she become as quickly self-reliant as possible? Ed mentioned that after the Iran-Iraq war, that Chicago took in many Iraqis. So that means there's a large contingent, a large population of Iraqis in Chicago. That's why Chicago has been a destination for many Iraqi refugees in the last year or two. So when they come here, what is involved in refugee resettlement? Sometimes my office will only have 3 or 4, 5 days notice. Usually it's more like 3 weeks. It used to be 3 months. In those few days, we need to get an apartment ready. We need to identify an apartment, one that hopefully the refugee will be able to afford as quickly as can be. We need to prepare the apartment with most basic furniture, with all the items that are required under our contract with Department of State. So many knives, forks, spoons, a smoke detector, and all of it. Last time you moved, you remembered what it takes. Basically, we need to have the apartment set up in that way. Before the refugee arrives, our caseworkers are getting to work putting a case file together on them. We go to the community to try to engage community to help us with setting up the apartment. so that when they arrive at O'Hare, not only are we there for them, but hopefully some of our friends from the community. So you can hear some of what I'm saying. There's a role, there's a responsibility for the community, not just the aid agency, but also the community as well. When the refugee arrives at the airport, we are welcoming them there. We have people who speak their language at the airport. We help them to get to their new apartment. We settle them in for the evening. And this is, again, I'm speaking for Interfaith Refugee and Immigration Ministries, and this is the office that I head, and I know that my staff are doing this on a regular basis. The night of the arrival, we have, again, under contract by Department of State, we have to have a culturally appropriate warm meal prepared for them. We need to have food in the pantry and cupboards sufficient to see them through until their food stamps kick in. And all that is ready and raring to go when they arrive. The next day, after hopefully sleeping well, they're in our office for intake procedures. Within 3 days' time, they will be enrolled in our English classes because we have English teachers in our office who will already assess their English. Let me say that's more like within 1 week. But within the first 3 days, paperwork has started for Social Security cards, for getting them to the health clinics, and working with them to help them begin to understand what hasn't already hit them, some of the challenges that they've already seen. Mind you, my team are made up of refugees themselves, so that interfaith people walk the talk. The vast majority of the people that I'm privileged to serve have come from Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, Somalia, and so forth. Because again, we need to have that cultural sensitivity to help them settle in. Our programs entail not just some of the things I've described, but also job placement. The sooner we can help a refugee take charge of her own life, the better. The sooner that she's able to find employable skills, even if it's not what she had been hoping for, the better, because the second job will be that much easier to get. Our programs also include special programs for children, special programs for women, and special programs for the elderly. We have immigration services so that they know their immigration rights as well as responsibilities, so that they can apply for other family members to come and join them, so that they can travel freely and safely. So you can see it's all comprehensive. In the space of any given year, I've had staff members present at an infant's birth, as well as myself attending a funeral. So it's from one end to the other, and it's all one-stop shop. But the responsibility isn't just ours. It rests also with the community, and most of all, in fact, with the refugee. Refugees are survivors. I'd hate to see myself try to go through what they've gone through. I'm incredibly impressed on a daily basis by their hope, their determination to start again, a new life. And so they themselves hold the true key to their own resettlement. We're simply there to give them a helping hand or a little bit of a push in the right direction into some of the aspects of the community. And of course, I've referred a few times to the role of the community. Warm, friendly faces, people who are willing to welcome refugees, not just at the airport, but on the streets, and to work with agencies like ours to help them understand the red line, or to help them try to understand the health system. I think we're all trying to understand that one. Or phones and all the rest. There's a role for everybody, and that's why often we play at our office with the word community, because in our commonness there is a real unity. In our communications we can unify ourselves and come together. Refugee attitudes therefore play a real important part in all of this. And as Ed was elucidating through the years, just a range of folks we have the privilege of serving. Last year, 2009, our office welcomed refugees, I believe, from 13 different countries, and including not just Iraq, but also Vietnam, even last year. Now, my team has to be able to speak those languages and to have the capacity to reach out to them. If we don't have every language on staff, we have to work with somebody else in the community that does. But along with that range of geographical spread comes also the fact that some are skilled, some are not, some are educated, some are not. Some are from large families, some are singles. And we need to be nimble enough to meet the needs of each and every one. For, as I've seen my staff, we deal with refugees one by one, each and every one as a human being, each and every one of them with needs like I have. Some are from urban areas, some are from rural areas, and we need to be flexible enough to meet all of those needs. And again, that's where community can step in, because community has elements of this picture that we don't have. What does it cost? A lot. We have been doing trying to make relatively careful studies over the last few years. Some of it is still more anecdotal than we'd like, but broadly, the work in my office shows that for a standard, if you will, there's no standard family of 4 coming in from any country, it's going to cost anywhere from $8,000 to $12,000 to help that family settle in before they arrive and their first 3 months, 90 days. There's no magic in the 90-day time frame, but we use that as a cutoff for various programmatic reasons. Again, think of the last time you moved and what it cost when you started putting together the Ajax and the sponge and the new mattress and this and that and the other. The amount of money, where does the money come from? A limited amount from government. Per refugee, we get $450 once and only once. That's not once a month, that's not once a year, that's once and only once. Basically, that is spent before we get to O'Hare. And yet we therefore do what we can on our own side to raise not just awareness like this, but also raise funds through congregations of faith, through individual people, through foundations. Another source of funds, and that, by the way, comes from the Population, Refugees, and Migration of the State Department. Ed referred to them before, BPRM, Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration. And it's channeled to me through our national voluntary agencies. But then there's another source of funds, and I'm probably overrunning my time right now, but I don't see too many board faces yet. Or our Office of Refugee Resettlement under Health and Human Services under Catherine Sebelius these days. Or our ropes off a chunk of money to help run programs that enable us to teach English for free, that enable us to have job developers. We have 2 of them who refugees don't pay them. It's channeled ORR funding, Office of Refugee Resettlement, through Illinois Department of Human Services and Dr. Silverman's office and on to us. That enables us to run the programs of the English language training, to have the language capacity, the multilingual, multi-ethnic caseworkers that we have. It enables us to run these programs that I'm talking about. But those funds have been flatlined for years. And as costs have gone up, and had spoken so movingly about the challenges that she's faced, I mean, if you think of the difficulty of trying to get a job, think if you came in hardly knowing language, and now you're competing with others, and the unemployment rate in Illinois is 10% plus. That said, our office, Interfaith Refugee and Immigration Ministries, has averaged, I just did the numbers yesterday afternoon, 18.3 new jobs a month during this year, 2009, since January. Mind you, January was a bad month, we had 5, but we had 1 month this past May, I think, when we had 35. We've averaged almost 19 new jobs a month for folks like Ahlam. So again, there's roles and responsibilities for everybody, yourselves included. Funding is a challenge, and yet I'll say on a brighter note, we have reason to believe that the new administration in Washington is looking, we know they're looking very seriously at these funding challenges that I've just described, because recently we had the #1 man in State Department here with his team looking at just the very things that Ahlam described before and some of the problems that I've laid out. I could go on and on. I'm going to end up now because there might be a question or two. What can you do? You can do a lot. $1 from you, and it's entirely tax deductible, goes more than that dollar will get to the refugee, because we find other ways through The next way you can help, volunteers. We don't categorize or qualify or quantify the number of volunteer hours we get. And we have hundreds, literally hundreds of volunteers at our office during the course of a year, whether it be through the Refugee Youth Program or the Women's Empowerment Program, whether it be in the office in general, or whether it be actually welcoming a refugee family, serving as a mentor. But cash contributions are incredibly valuable because, like I said, that's what makes a difference in human beings' lives, and right here in Chicago. One last comment on that. When you invest in the refugee community, you're investing in their homeland as well. The first person they're going to turn around and help, if it's a refugee from Sudan, is their mom still in Sudan. And then there's no sort of slice from an international organization or from a government. That goes straight down to impact the people still stuck either in the refugee camps or at home. So an investment in the local community and the refugees here, you get double bang for the buck. And finally, to just make a final point on all of this is, you know, there's room for everybody at the table. Come join us, and I'm sure you got some questions. How are we doing on time?
We're going to go about 5 or so minutes and take a shorter break.
Okay,
You guys can pick your.
go ahead.
A week ago Sunday, I read a very disturbing front page report on what seems to be a lot of travails happening to Iraqi refugees. And that would seem very disturbing, especially since the U.S. invaded the country. I think we have a special obligation that the people that displaced whose lives literally are at risk had to come here. So I'm trying to square what I read in that article with what seems to be a kind of a glowing report of success. And I'm not meaning to put you on the spot.
No, that's fair enough. And you probably also read a quote of mine there as well, where I basically said sometimes, and I'll repeat it here too, I feel like I'm selling a lie on this American dream because it's so challenging to attain it. We are limited in what we can do, and that's why we look to community to support and work with us. Every bit as much as I was saying at the break, every bit as much as what I talk to all of you about challenges and ways to help. I'm pretty blunt when I talk to the Department of State and to the Office of Refugee Resettlement to say how much we're not doing a proper job of welcoming refugees properly. If we cannot welcome one properly, we shouldn't be welcoming 100,000. And so the challenges laid in front of us are immense, and yet it's not something that we can achieve all on our own. I don't mean to paint such a glowing picture to say that everyone is smiling and happy, because it's not that way. Now, I don't know if I'm addressing your question. Maybe, Ed, you got a sentence and we can...
Well, you know, the journalists, in a way, self-selected the people that they interviewed. So they were not talking about the successful stories. They were talking about, in effect, attitude. You know, the one fellow who refused to take a job because he wants a career in computers. And the fact of the matter is that jobs are survival. You know, in some respects, the program is broken. We're resettling people into culture of poverty. For Burmese who have been in a Thai refugee camp for 10, 15 years, Chicago looks pretty good. For the Iraqis, they've seen their whole world destroyed, and they have to start over. You know, at one point we resettled Supreme Court Justice from Vietnam, author of the Vietnamese Constitution. First job, a clerk, a messenger in a law firm. Former Minister of Defense for the Congo, is a bellman in Springfield.
Ed was saying they self-selected the refugees, and really they only told one part of the story. One of the men that was interviewed, the veterinarian doctor, my office has spent $6,000 on his rent so far. That wasn't put in the story. That came out of contributions from folks like yourself. The other lady who is quoted as crying outside and getting pots and pans, used pots and pans, we know for a fact what she had in her apartment when she arrived. She told us that she was crying because her sister was deathly sick in the hospital, and that was sort of quoted out of context. In her case, I had signed a rent check for her the day before for $485. That didn't make it in the paper either.
So it was a very selective picture. And, I'm glad that they did the story. Their overview was solid. And, our main challenge, as Greg has pointed out, at this point, is rent.
And they picked up on that article from myself, and I'm glad they did the article too. We wrote a letter to the editor to try to tell the whole picture. We move on, there's a question here and there.
My name is Fatima Haidi.
Go ahead, please, I'm sorry.
I speak English not very well because this I want
Don't ask me to talk to you in Arabic.
Nawal help me for
Please.
I ask first my question, I ask you read this article?
Yes?
And who is this woman?
Alan, it's the lady that was here, I believe.
No, I.
I'm sorry, I can't see it from here.
All people, I want to see this. This I and my daughter. My work is in my country, professor in Baghdad University and journalist. And worked in Brussels and another countries. I have a lot of money in my country. After killed my family and lost everything, some militia and man work with American government in Iraq. Kidnap me and rape me. Now I have daughter, don't have name or father, don't have anything, just publicate, give me $300 every month. And some people help me, especially Nazish today sent to me $86 for a bus card because I don't have bus card. I don't have anything. No one please help me. My story يعني قصتي الحقيقية هي هذه لكن أكثر من هذه. أنا لما أتكلم عن قصتي الحقيقية.
She didn't talk about her real story on the newspaper
Because I خبأت كثير من
because
الحقائق.
she was afraid about a lot of reality that she gonna talk about it on the article.
Another lady, Layla. Layla before publicate repeat to Layla assist مساعدة. Nazish helped Layla for 3 months. I met Layla in Divan. Layla wants sell herself. For any man, ask Layla come to me. And I found Layla in street cry, don't have anything. And another man named Jassim. Jassim have 3 children. Single father. Jassim don't have high degree, don't have high education. Very يعني بسيط جدا.
Very simple man.
Very simple man. Now yesterday publicate called Jassim. This month no more assist. Cut everything. Yesterday Jassim come to my home cry. Cry Jassim man cry. And like crazy. Jassim yesterday asked me, Fatima help me. Because I work with Julia Phil for Reach and work with Ahnam and Nazish.
If I may, I think what's really, really important is to sit down with the agency that helped welcome you here, that received you into this country, and to work with them. If it's my office, I don't believe so, but if it is, come in and we will work through each and every issue that you're talking about. The gentleman you're talking about, the single father, there had to be an office that worked with him. that office has a responsibility, just as Interfaith has to each and every refugee we've resettled. And it's very important that you go and sit down and work through these issues with them as much as can be. I'm not trying to duck it but
And
Okay,
he has children, so,
3 children.
so I don't understand why his public assistance would be canceled. So-
Yesterday, called Jasmine, cut. No more.
I,
After the next
doesn't-
month, cut.
I mean,
something's wrong there.
again, I would say if it's Interfaith Refugee and Immigration Ministries, we have caseworkers that will sit with you, and if they're not doing the job, our program director and I will step in and we'll make sure that things are working, and those are not just hollow words.
Not this, just this story. يعني ليست فقط هذه القصص، وإنما هنالك قصص حقيقية وقصص كبيرة. نوع ما في يعني أي منظمة تسأل عنهم.
She said that there is not only those stories, there are a lot of stories and a lot of really sad stories
Especially single mother.
Believe me, I
and
know.
no one talk about them, especially for single mothers that will live in here and suffering with their
Believe me,
children.
we
أنا
know that.
حاولت مرتين ألتقي سيلفرمان، لكن ما حد سمح لي ألتقي به.
She tried many times to meet Mr. Silverman, but no one let her meet him. They didn't.
Well, but you have to understand, I mean, he was citing numbers before of thousands of people, and that doesn't mean that he's not going to deal with each and every one as a human being, but that's why I'm saying you should be talking to those people who have been entrusted with welcoming you and serving you properly. And this is how you should recommend to all of your people.
المنظمات ما تساعد، المنظمات تساعد فترة قليلة.
She said that the organization, they don't help him anymore.
My organization told me, Fatima, go to church, go to mosque, maybe help you. After cut everything about me and my daughter. Now like homeless, many people like homeless.
You know it.
أنا أقول الحقيقة بعض اللاجئين كذابين.
She's saying the reality because she knows that there's a
يشتغلون
lot of
cash.
refugees
I know
there
it.
online.
Yeah,
I know
يشتغلون
it.
كاش يعملون كاش. Have a lot of money. بعض اللاجئين كاذبين.
She said there are a lot of refugees, they're lying, they're working for cash, they have a lot of money, but they deny this, so they can give more and more money
Yeah.
to the
And
government.
I'm sorry, I hate to interrupt. Thank you, Fatma, for sharing with us, because I think it's very important that everybody understands the frustration of the community, but for the sake of time, we do have to move on to the next panel. And I apologize for those of you who did not get a chance to ask a question. Perhaps you can ask the panelists
Individually.
during our break, but I'd like to
Yeah.
thank you both very much for coming, and we will be taking a 5-minute break, and please be back in your seats in 5 minutes for the next panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you.